I'm ready.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. Come to you, as always, from deep within the Outer Rim, far beyond the watchful eyes of the Galactic Empire. My name is John Martali, and joining me today is our we can now officially say, official new co-host, Garrett Jones. Garrett, welcome back to the show, and welcome as an official host to War of the Stars.
Hello there.
General Kenobi.
Yes.
That's always my test to see, okay, are you really a Star Wars fan? If I go, hello there. If they do not immediately say General Kenobi, I'm like, come on.
If they don't recognize what movie that's from, or which character, you don't need that kind of negativity in your life.
That's right. That's right. Oh man, it is a beautiful day out here in the Outer Rim. How is it in your neck of the galaxy?
I'm pretty sure I'm on Tatooine at this point. It's it's hot. I mean, I grew up in Arizona, so I'm sure that place is just baking right now. But
yeah,
it's been night, like breezy, not terrible, but it's a little humid today. We've got some weird overcast weather. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so let's just get right to it because we have a big topic to handle today. We're going to look at the much maligned sequel trilogy and put our own little spin on it, our own little fun little rewrite. As we were talking about before off camera, our only rule that we're going to have is no recasting as far as the characters go. The characters have to at least somewhat remain the same as what they are. We can retool maybe motivations for them, backstory, stuff like that. But, there's no switching out something like switching out Kylo Ren for, say, Jason Solo. Nothing like that. You can retool it so that maybe he's more like Jason, but there's no like just changing out or putting in different characters that will maybe. Well, we can come to that. We can come to that later. Of putting in newer characters. So let's just start with the first movie then. Let's just start with Force Awakens, which, in my estimation, really requires the least amount of change.
Yeah,
I think.
I agree with you on that. Just from a storytelling perspective, because it's introducing a whole new list of characters.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I got to say, going into this, it's important to look at where the story starts because I mean, one of the big rules of writing anything, whether it's a short story, a movie, a book, whatever it is, you want to look for the ending. You want to know
Mm-hmm.
where you're taking these characters, where you're taking the story, because if you don't write with the ending in mind, it's actually going to be it's going to make it problematic later on when you're developing the next step in the story. And if you're looking at the trilogy like I do, as like each trilogy being one act in a larger story, so like A New Hope was the first act of a 3-act story. Empire was the second act. Jedi was the third act. They tell a story. Same thing with the prequels. And unfortunately, the weakest of the bunch has been the sequel trilogy because they did not write with the ending in mind. There was, and it was, it came out and it was said by Abrams that was the case. They didn't have any idea of where they were taking these characters, which is a shame because the characters in of themselves are not bad. How they were acted wasn't bad. It was how they were directed, how they were written, especially by that apple-headed Rian Johnson.
See, I disagree. I think there's things in the Rian Johnson movie that if they would have kept that in going into, particularly the idea of Rey being a nobody. That's one thing I will stand by because that would have made more sense whenever she did take the Skywalker name. It would have made more sense if she had been a nobody because for me at least, it would have made more sense. I like that idea of her not being anyone special, her not being from any particular name, and then I like that idea of that Ryan had with that of having her be a nobody.
I do too, and I will agree with you on that one. My biggest concern was you have directors and writers who are either fans in name only, or they've never been a fan of the franchise at all, have no idea what they're doing, and so they're working on this franchise, they're working on this saga, and they're putting their spin, they're deconstructing these characters, but they're not doing anything really new with them, and whatever they do accomplish ends up kind of just completely destroying anything that was built up in the previous entry. Because I mean, by the time The Rise of Skywalker came out, the whole goal of that film was to simply undo some of the things that had happened in The Last Jedi, which The Last Jedi inadvertently undid some characterizations that were developed in The Force Awakens. So, but let's get into this. Let's kind of develop the stories and see where they take us.
All right. So, I mean, where do we start as far as
go ahead.
As far as like making changes and making like I think we've already kind of said that. I mean, what changes do we need to make to Force Awakens, if any?
Well, with Force Awakens, making it almost a shot-for-shot remake of A New Hope was kind of it was kind of the downfall of this trilogy, because I get that they wanted to make something familiar, but you can still do that, especially with the environment, with the lore, and still make it its own thing. If you look at, I mean, as shoddily written as the dialogue was from the prequel trilogy, each film was its own thing. And it didn't try to imitate what came before it. It didn't try to, it built off of it, because it's all part of the same story. And there was an ending point. The prequel trilogy was all about showing us Anakin's rise amongst the Jedi and fall towards the Sith. And it does that in spectacular fashion. And honestly, of the three films, probably The Revenge of the Sith is by far the best of the three. Which, if you look at, depending on who you ask and which decade they were born, fans of the original trilogy are going to say it's either A New Hope or Empire.
Right.
But with The Force Awakens, I would say I like the way it started off. They're looking this idea that they're looking for Skywalker, and they're trying to find out where he is. I think is a brilliant idea. My thought would be, I like the idea of him being in hiding or being in exile, but this idea that it happened over one mistake more than a decade prior, or however long it was, we don't really get that indication. It feels really out of nowhere and very out of character for Luke Skywalker, because by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, he's a fully realized Jedi. He's a fully realized hero. He has faced that mirror challenge, that test of spirit that every Jedi must go through in order to achieve knighthood. And he came out of it pulling away from the dark side, seeing that those tendencies within himself that he got from his father. And to be fair, if you look at someone shared something with me on this, it was if you look at the nature of the relationship between Luke and Leia and their parents, Luke is far more like his mother. He's very kind, very willing to do self-sacrifice than he is, but he's got that adventurous streak like his father. Leia, on the other hand, she is more like Vader than she realizes, and she's never even she only met him in the capacity in which she did through the films. She never knew him dad. So it's you see those tendencies in both characters. She's very, very conniving, very forceful. She's willing to just kind of step out and just say, "Hey, I don't like this." She speaks her mind. So, like, looking at the kind of trajectory that Luke had, I think him being in hiding because I think it's an interesting idea, but we need to have a stronger sense of the exile. Why is he going into exile? It can't be just because he sensed darkness in his nephew and is pushed towards that. Like, it felt out of nowhere. Whereas, and so that kind of that nod, like, because we really had no antagonist through most of Force Awakens. The antagonist is supposed to be Kylo Ren, who is basically a carbon copy of Vader without the breathing issues.
Yeah. I mean, you can argue with as far as why Luke, went into hiding is, not only wasn't just Ben falling to the dark side, it was the destruction of the temple and the death of all the students. Like, he lost his entire, like, all his students were killed, so he lost everything. So,
see, that's all stuff that's talked about off screen, or it's talked about on screen, but something that happens off screen, and so we don't get the gist of how that happened. We don't know who the attacking force was. We don't know what it was that caused that destruction. What it was that
and that's a flaw. I mean, a flaw in where you have so little time to you have a limited amount of time to tell that story, and I understand that, like, as fans, we might read the supplemental, the books and the stuff like that would tell that story, but how do you tell that story on screen without taking away from the general story and and adding too much to it?
So here's my thought. That whole first movie should have been about the fall of Skywalker's Jedi school. That would have set up the tension and the drama that follows throughout the rest of the trilogy. So if we had started off with this idea, hey, Luke has set this school up. This is what he has established with his legacy over the last 30 years, while his sister has gone off to help operate in the New Republic, and his brother-in-law has gone to do whatever it is that Han does. All right, we could catch up with Han later, but my thought would be is I like the idea that Kylo Ren is his nephew, that he has turned to the dark side. I think that's cool. But what I would have been more interested in seeing is that everything that built up to the destruction of that temple, with Rey being a Padawan that Luke has taken on at maybe at this point, Kylo or Ben Solo, whatever you want to call him, he's become more or less a fully realized Jedi. He's on the verge of assuming knighthood, and Luke takes on this new apprentice in Rey, and Kylo's already having his issues with the dark side and his lust for power because he's been reading up on his grandfather, and so he turns against his uncle, goes to the dark side, turns against his uncle. Which then creates that necessary conflict where Luke is in hiding, but Rey is still she's looking for Leia. She's looking for the remnant of Leia's rebellion, and so because the Imperial remnant, the First Order, it feels really unnecessary. In a political changeover like what we see at the end of Return of the Jedi, there's going to be that Imperial remnant, and the books do a great job of, prior to Disney getting their hands on the franchise, they did a great job of establishing, that you've got this remnant who are loyal to the Empire, but they don't want the things that the Emperor wanted. They don't want to do the same things that Palpatine was doing. But they do want the control and stability that he was providing.
Right.
And so if we had something like that with the New Republic kind of merging side by side 30 years down the line, seeing what that political structure would have been like, that would have been a much more impressive dynamic to work with in, because who knows, maybe with Kylo, maybe he chooses the name Kylo Ren because he's establishing his own Sith order. Like he's deciding he doesn't want to be a Sith, but he wants to be dark side.
Right.
That sort of thing. And so he being that he's Vader's grandson, he wants to be in control. That would be where I would take The Force Awakens, because it feels like it would be a much better story, much more dynamic. Because then you could have those character interactions, and Finn could still be an Imperial stormtrooper who sees these differences and decides he wants to switch sides without being some kind of conditioned or brainwashed individual.
Yeah. Now let's get to the elephant in the room. The death of Han Solo. Does that stay in? Because that was one of the conditions that Harrison Ford put in. That he wanted a death scene. So I mean, I think you almost have to have that in there.
I would say yes, and here's why: because maybe Luke, before he fully goes off into exile or whatever it is he does at the end of the film, maybe he reaches out to Han, because this is Han's son. He can't get a hold of Leia because Leia is doing something political, and is busy. So he reaches out to Han. Because maybe he's been trying to help bridge that broken relationship between father and son for these two people that he loves so dearly. So at that point, Han would show up. He and Chewie would, try to bridge that connection with Kylo, trying to bring him back to being Ben, and Kylo knowing what he wants and still having that bitter resentment towards his father kills him. That would make, because otherwise the resentment doesn't make sense without seeing where it stems from.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to talk about, and how we could possibly bring this into the characterization, especially of Luke Skywalker, was one thing that was touched in, I think, in a little bit in Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker both, is this idea of people having so much expectation of what Luke Skywalker would, at least in universe, of like he even talks about in Last Jedi. People, I was the hero. I was this legend, the legend of Luke Skywalker, and this idea of not being able to live up to that expectations of people expecting Luke to be this almost mythical, godlike figure, and him saying, "I can't do that. That's not me." How do we work with what you're saying? Is there a way to work that character? Because I did like that idea of that characterization of Luke not necessarily feeling lost, but feeling like, the people are expecting too much of me. I'm only human.
I see, and here's the thing: is that I think we already had that established, that personality trait. Like, if you look at the way he is, by the time he gets to the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Okay. Not only is he that fully realized character, but his maturity has increased, where the impatience and the impulsiveness that he had in prior, in episode 4 and episode 5, they're no longer there. He's realized he's got that weakness, and he's stemming that. Because if he has this midlife crisis where he's worried about people seeing him as some kind of heroic Messiah character, when he's never viewed himself as that.
Yeah.
He didn't have the Messiah complex that Anakin did. Anakin had been raised under that expectation that he was the chosen one. Right. He states it. And Kenobi even states that.
Yeah.
Luke never had that expectation. The only expectation that Luke had was taking up the mantle of the Jedi, so that their traditions and that their responsibilities would never die throughout the galaxy.
Right.
And And so if we have that character making the choice at the end of Return of the Jedi, saying, I'm a Jedi like my father before me, and carrying that as his mentality moving forward, the next 30 years take care of themselves. We don't have to worry about that issue, because that's not a conflict with the character.
Yeah.
He might have a loss of confidence because of Ben Solo willingly choosing to turn to the dark side, but we don't have this complete breakdown of character that shouldn't exist in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard people make the argument of, you're not the same person you were 30 years ago when people change. As far as, Luke not being the same as he was at the end of Return of the Jedi to 30 years later, that things can happen, people can change, and, your mentality and your thought process and how you view things might change from when you were 20 some years old to when you're in your 40s and 50s.
And that's true. People do change over time. However, core components of who they are, of their identity, of how they view themselves, that doesn't change that rapidly. Not in 30 years. I mean, look at the people that you're closest to. Look at your parents. Okay. And while they might make mistakes at some point because of insecurities, because of concerns, worries, what have you, deep down, they're still the same people 30 years as they were 30 years ago. They're still the loving, compassionate, hopefully loving, compassionate people that you knew them to be. Now, yes, our view of them from the time that my interactions with my parents are a great example. Growing up, my dad was my hero. I looked up to him as a hero figure. By the time I got into college, there was some animosity between us because the dynamic had shifted, because I was no longer the little kid that I used to be. Mm-hmm. I was an adult, and he had difficulty seeing me as that. But people that have known me since, grade school, middle school, high school, college, they still see me as, as the person that I was back then. I was fairly consistent in the kind of person I was. Was there room for improvement? Absolutely. But the dynamic of who I was in my core content has not really deviated that much where I was 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. So I think we've kind of moved on. So let's move on to the second movie.
Okay.
And now you've said the past of the timing of the movie. So, I mean, how do we set up the time jump or any time jump in this, going from Force Awakens to Last Jedi?
I think that the time jump, it can be fine. Like, because I know that The Last Jedi opens up just within minutes or hours.
Well, and that's the thing, is it's for me at least, it's at one point it seems like it's just been minutes or hours after, with them with the Resistance fleeing the planet and the First Order chasing after them. But yet when you go to Act 2, it's like, okay, how much time has passed? I mean, how long has Rey? Because it seems like Rey has been on that planet for a while. So it's like, are there two different time periods going on here where it's...
Yeah, the use of time is critically important, because some things feel really rushed, other things feel really protracted, and you're not really sure. But all the while, you have that ticking clock of the Resistance running out of fuel while trying to run away from the Empire. And it's like a lot of the things that happened in that film, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. So like having the movie pick up right on the heels of Force Awakens would be perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So long as the opening crawl explains that, because that's what the opening crawl is supposed to be for. The opening crawl is to kind of give you an idea of bridging what happened between the previous entry and this one. And the original and the prequel trilogies do a fairly good job of that. You get this idea that the characters have changed, that they've grown up, or that they state how much time has passed.
Yeah.
Like between episode 1 and episode 2, Anakin has gone from being this 8 to 10-year-old kid to being an almost 20-year-old adult. And he states, it's been 10 years since I've seen Padme.
Yeah.
I don't know if she's going to remember me because, I was a little kid. I can't get her off my mind, that kind of thing. But so we have to, that kind of time jump, if there is going to be one, needs to be established.
Yeah. I would also, sorry. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would also set up, instead of having Rey go off to, looking for, Luke at the end of the last movie, have that be at the very beginning of this movie, where, as kind of like what they did at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, where they're trying to flee Hoth, and the rebels go off one way, but Luke goes off the other way. You could have something like that where, the
John? Hello?
Oh, I'm there. Can you see me?
Okay. Yeah, I can see you.
Everyone went black on my end too. But, something like that where, so that would be, I think that would help the time jump a little bit, because you could have Rey and the Resistance going off at the same time in different directions.
My thought on that is this: is that especially if we're keeping Ren as the chief protagonist or chief antagonist, the fact that he was the key component to decimating the new school that Skywalker put together. My thought would be is that he goes after Skywalker, and in this one, he does actively kill him. And we don't see it happen actively, like in like the present tense. We see it happening at like in the aftermath. Like the film could pick up in the aftermath of the destruction of the school, with him fighting Luke, and then the time jump is that it jumps forward, let's say a year, maybe 2. Rey is on the run. She's a fugitive trying to get away from Ren because she knows that he's hunting her down. She's the last Jedi. Okay, he's killed all the other Padawans. And in the flashbacks leading up to, you can do things anachronistically or outside that time, that chronological time. And you could have these flashbacks leading up to her watching Luke get cut down by Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
And that Luke does it to save her, just as Kenobi did it to save him. Okay. So you have that mentor sacrifice, just like we saw in the original film, without it being a carbon copy. And at that point, and so for her, maybe she hasn't gone through the trials for knighthood.
Right.
And so she's going through those trials now. Maybe she's accomplished 1 or 2 of them, but she hasn't accomplished all of them, because according to the lore, there's 5 of them. Okay. She's lost her mentor. She doesn't know who else to turn to. At this point, this gives her the opportunity to definitely turn to the skid and find Leia. Because Leia will know. And so then we could still have the same premise that, Han dies in episode 7, Luke dies in episode 8, but it's done a little bit more consistent with how the characters were originally written. And then her big test is to decide whether or not she wants to side with Kylo or not, because maybe he's saying, as he's hunting her, she's seeing some of the things that he has seen. Like, as she's going back through these memories, she's seeing the way that Luke was, that he wasn't the perfect teacher that she thought he was.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the expectation. It's not that Luke had that about himself. It's that she had it about Luke. and she feels somehow let down by that, and so she's wrestling with what she believed versus what reality is, expectation versus reality. And so she has to face that test. Do I want to turn to the dark side or not? That gives us the segue. That gives us a lot of the drama and the set to segue into episode 9, which at this point, Rise of Skywalker could be less about the individual or the name. It could be more about the school, and that maybe in at the end of this revamped version of episode 8, we have the decision that she's made that she's going to stick with the light side, and she is going to now seek out any other survivors from the school.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where the Rise of Skywalker comes about, is that she's carrying on that Skywalker name as far as the tradition of the school.
Mm-hmm.
And she's found a new Padawan to raise, and she's protecting. She goes from being protected as a Padawan to being on the run as a rogue, to now protecting a potential young Padawan from Kylo Ren.
So I've noticed we've skipped. We've kind of glossed, and I don't know if this is on purpose. Some other characters like General Hux and Snoke. Are those characters that you would just take out or leave in, or how would you? Because there has to. I mean, for Kylo to turn, there has to be. There always seems to be in Star Wars that, like with Anakin, it was Palpatine pulling the strings and kind of leading him. Would you kind of have that same character to lead kind of Kylo to the dark side, to be the one whispering in his ear?
Here's how I would have used Snoke, because Snoke he's a red herring throughout the sequel trilogy. You think he's this big bad guy, and he's not. Yeah. My thought would be, as far as chief antagonists, Kylo is the chief antagonist, but here's where it makes the connection. Snoke is not a tangible antagonist. He is a holograph. He's a holocron. He's a Sith simulacrum of a Sith warlord from way back when. Right. And Kylo found that on one of his adventures. And that could be something that is alluded to in the revamp of episode 7, and that he keeps going back to this informational source that is little by little corrupting his spirit. Because Sith were known for their alchemy. They were known for using some kind of dark magic embedded within scientific technology. And so using that holocron or that simulacrum, whatever you want to call it, he keeps accessing it, and it's kind of like the One Ring of Power. The more he uses it, the more it's going to draw him to being. I like that. To being a bad guy. Like that way, Snoke is corrupting him. Snoke is having this influence on him, but it's from an intangible perspective. Okay, these are the teachings of a long dead Sith Lord. As far as General Hux, maybe he is a political crony, that he is part of this Imperial remnant that's left over from the last 30 years, but he has a bid for power. He doesn't. He's his family could have been longtime sympathizers of the Empire. He wants to have his family's a legacy family to an extent, and he's following in his family's footsteps. That he's joining, and so he's trying to create a new First Order. Right. He's trying to rebuild the Imperial remnant into something stronger, and so he sides with Kylo as a means to an end.
You could almost, I just thought of this, you could almost have the First Order as they see this kind of meshing of the New Republic and the Imperial remnant, as like, you could almost have it separate. That's kind of what I would with that political thing, where they see, whereas Hux and this other group of, let's call them extremists, see this sort of, as the Empire and the New Republic kind of mesh together. They're like, we don't like that. We want things, to be back the way they were. So they can be almost like an extremist faction of that, where they're not the First Order is like, we want things the way they used to be under the Empire, under the original New Order of Palpatine's New Order. Why are you colluding with rebels, type of a thing?
Absolutely, it could be very much that extremist, very, very conservative, or I guess it's either way. It's a political faction that wants to go back to the way things were done, 30 years ago, and Hux is this true believer in that, and I think for Hux, it would be kind of interesting when he comes to the realization that Kylo is using him just as much as he's using Kylo, and at which point he's able to he kind of sees that Kylo doesn't care. He doesn't give one rip about a First Order or any kind of political agenda. He just wants power, and he has the means to take it, and he's going to do away with Hux anyway. So that would spurn Hux to be maybe like, I'm going to side with, I'm going to change my gears here just a little bit, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and right now Kylo is my enemy. So you can have that. I think still having other legacy characters like Lando and Chewie coming back in, I think that would still get done. We just have to find a more organic way of doing that, because it felt kind of out of nowhere that, Lando became a general within the rebellion, but what would he do after that? The guy was a professional gambler. Professional gamblers don't stick around to become military men or spies. They go back to what they do. And so, when there's nobody to fight, he's going to be bored. So we could find better ways of incorporating. Maybe he's the owner of the casino at Canto Bight. And maybe while Rey's on the run, she could go to him looking for shelter.
Yeah. So, are we just totally doing away with the return of Palpatine then?
Oh, absolutely. There's no need for him to return.
Okay.
The fact that
I think that was more. I think I think that was more of just the shock value. I think they did that for the initial reaction people would give when they heard the laugh of Palpatine. Oh, Palpatine's back. But I don't know if they really had any plans for, like, other than, let's bring back Palpatine. That'll be cool.
Yeah, and the Clone Wars, the cloning technology that was enveloped there, it was used to create living weapons and programmable living weapons who would be completely subservient to Palpatine's needs. But and I get that the technology could have been there as a kind of a forefront to cloning a Jedi, but the funny thing is that the lore has always been about, you can't clone a Jedi, you can't clone midi-chlorian capabilities. It's just not there. Like,
but they did it in the comics. There was a whole comic series where they brought back the Emperor. The dark.
It wasn't exactly the same. He didn't have the same level of power. There was something deteriorated about him.
They did do that. Even in the Thrawn novels, when they brought back the clone of Jorah Sabaoth, it was shown that he's a little unhinged. He's not quite there.
Yeah, he wasn't right in the head. And you see this again in The Force Unleashed Part 2, the video game, where you go to the cloning facility on Kamino, and Starkiller, the actual original version of Starkiller, he's having to fight all these clones of himself, but they're very deteriorated. They don't have this. They've got their power levels are either way too strong or they're way too weak, and they just can't control themselves, and they're feral almost.
Yeah.
And so that, I mean, yeah, but I mean, it feels, having Palpatine there feels very out of nowhere, because how do you transfer consciousness like that? That's never anything that was ever established in the Clone Wars. It was never established in the original trilogy. It was never established in the prequel trilogy. Projecting oneself through the Force, yes, that can be done, but it takes a lot of energy to do that, and a lot of concentration. And someone like Yoda, Yoda didn't project himself through the Force. He opened himself up to feeling those projections from the Force. Big difference. And just because you have a clone of someone doesn't mean the consciousness that pops up from that is going to be the same as the original person. So my thought would be, do away with that and just continue making Kylo Ren the antagonist. Let him be the negative focus, because then you have a character that we can see him as he's rising to power and the things he is doing to assume that power. Right. Because at this point, he doesn't care about the sanctity of life like a Jedi would. He's given up on that. Yeah. He's killed fellow classmates. He's killed his original teacher / uncle. He's killed his own father. And maybe he makes an attempt on to really kind of separate Rey from any help that she could have gotten. He makes an attempt on his own mother's life to provoke Rey into doing something that she wouldn't otherwise do. It would be one of those things to throw her off balance, where she goes and it really puts the decision that she makes in the revamped episode 8, where she decides to stick with being a Jedi instead of following Kylo. It really puts that decision to the test. Yeah. Because then she's got this young potential Padawan looking up to her. Can she live up to the same example that Luke set for her?
Now, what about the idea of redemption for Kylo? Because I think when we went into originally when things were going into the original episode 9, the original version of it, I kept telling people the same thing. I'm like, because people were saying there's no way Kylo could be redeemed. He killed his fathers. There's no way. I was like, then you haven't watched Star Wars, because Star Wars is about, one of the key, especially the original trilogy, was about redemption, the redemption of Darth Vader. So to me it was like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, Kylo is going to be redeemed. At least in the original telling of the story, Kylo had to be redeemed for the story to come full circle. Especially if you're going on the idea of he's following in his grandfather's footsteps. Then if you're doing that in both a literal sense, then that's going to be the final thing of, just like his grandfather, he comes back to the light. Right,
but if we're going off this direction that this trajectory that we've been developing, from a story perspective, it wouldn't make sense to have a redemption arc. See, the reason why Anakin fell to the dark side is because he did it because he loved too strongly, in a relationship that was forbidden, and he kept it a secret. If he had not kept it a secret, had he been willing to face the consequences of those decisions, he would have had the assistance necessary. The problem with that lies in is that with Kylo, maybe the lie that he is, characters always have a lie that they believe. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily need to lead to a redemption arc. But for Kylo, the lie that he believes, and this is coming from the teachings from that Snoke simulacrum that he's been listening to, that holocron, is that he sees that his grandfather had more power at his disposal when turning to the dark side. Okay. That's the lie. And so for him, he doesn't need to be redeemed, because he is choosing. He's not choosing it because he's trying to protect somebody else. He's choosing it because he wants that control. He feels like Skywalker let him down in some way, shape, or form. That the teachings he was getting from this long dead evil warlord are far better than anything life preserving that he got from Skywalker, and so he is making a conscious decision to be a destructive force in the galaxy. At that point, there's no need for a redemptive arc because he's simply choosing control and power so that he can say, "Hey, look, I did it better."
Yeah.
Okay. He's simply trying to outdo, and maybe he's given the option. Maybe he's shown evidence to the contrary. Maybe the part he doesn't understand is the sacrifice that Vader made to protect Luke, because that wasn't part of the story that he was told. But what if he is told that? What if he is shown that through Luke's own holocron? He finds it, or it's presented to him by Rey. He sees that, and he still chooses to go the route that he's going. He's not a villain for the sake of being a villain. He's a villain because deep down in his core logic, he thinks he's the hero because he's been victimized by someone who took control of him.
Yeah. 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 I mean, you could also have the idea of, having a kid who, the son of a famous politician, son of a famous journal, where maybe he holds some resentment towards his parents. His parents weren't there. His parents, left him with this weird uncle to train him. And, we're kind of absent. So you have that mentality too going on. And I think if you did want to do a redemption arc, that would be, I think you would still do it through that thing of his mother. If you did want to do it, that would be the way to do it is through Leia, I think.
Right. And I think that could potentially work. I think it would be much more dynamic to have a villain character who is not redeemed.
Yeah.
Because for 2/3, well, almost 3/4 of the original trilogy, Vader was the big bad. Yeah, you had Palpatine.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that. I think there was only one movie where he was truly the big bad, and that was Empire. I think in A New Hope, the big bad is Tarkin. Vader is just, Vader's there, and yes, he's more of the heavy. Like he's Vader's attack. He's not Vader's attack dog. He's Tarkin's attack dog. And then in Jedi, it's the Emperor who turns out to be the big bad. It's really only Empire where Vader is shown to be the main antagonist of that movie.
Yeah, because he's an antagonist because he's relentlessly pursuing Han and Leia as a means of getting to Luke.
Yeah.
And while he does antagonize them, that comes more at the end. He's more of an antagonist to his own people than anything else, simply because he's periodically throwing a temper tantrum. But again, that's Anakin coming through. That's the impulsivity that he's been holding on to and trying to rein in the last 20 years since the Clone Wars. And he's finally at this point where he's frustrated. He no longer has Tarkin holding his leash. He's been given free reign by the Emperor, and now he's like, screw it. Anybody who crosses me, I don't care if they work for me or not, they're gonna die. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, kind of cringed when they saw Kylo throw his little temper tantrum, where he, tore up. But I'm watching him like saying, that's if Vader hadn't been restricted by the suit as far as his movement, that's exactly what Anakin would have done. It's just
absolutely. He would have smashed something. But Anakin also had other elements where, and we see this in the Clone Wars comics that were put out by Dark Horse. We see this put out in the Clone Wars series, where when he got frustrated about something, he would work on something. He would tinker. He would build. He would experiment with mechanics.
Yeah.
And once he became Vader, he didn't have that anymore. Because the moment he had any free time, he spent that time either in bacta tanks trying to heal his body, or he was taking his momentary reposes in his hyperbaric chamber on board the Star Destroyer to give his body a chance to move without being restricted by the suit.
Right.
And so he didn't have that same release that he had, that moving meditation where he was like, tinkering on his fighter or tinkering on a droid, or, taking apart his lightsaber piece by piece and putting it all back together. Those things would calm him down. He doesn't have that. So all that repressed frustration and anger comes out in the temper tantrums. Kylo could still carry on that behavior. The temper tantrums, I think, were a nice nod to the fact that, he is his grandfather's grandson.
Yeah. And people complain about, oh, he's too whiny. Again, that's a Skywalker trait. You're whining. I mean, look at Luke. What's the first line?
Station to pick up some power
converters. Which is something I always, anytime anybody complains about the "I hate sand" line, I always point them to that. I'm like, it runs in the family.
It does.
It runs in the family. Skywalker men are whiny.
The only non-whiny Skywalker has ever been Leia. Everyone knows this.
Oh, which is so ironic that she's the most like Anakin.
Yeah, well,
but she's the least whiny.
Yeah, well, when it comes to political fervor, when it comes to the use of control and military power, she's definitely more like Anakin than she would want to believe.
Yeah. Oh, so we end with the defeat. I'm guessing the defeat of Kylo.
Yeah, for I would say for this, I would say as a means of.
Now here's because you mentioned having Rey have a Padawan. Do we set something up where that Padawans might start to get turned, and that he or her have that redemption where she starts to get swayed to the dark side, even turn for a little bit, and then he or she is the one that gets that redemption arc?
Yes. And I think that would be a better use of a redemption story, because it could be something that character is wrestling with, and maybe the person that he or she talks to is Finn, who's become this friend and confidant for Rey over the last couple of movies, could be like, hey, look, I worked for the Empire, or I worked for the First Order.
Yeah,
I worked as part of this extremist political group, and I realized just how destructive they were. You still have a choice, just like I have had a choice. The only time you don't have a choice is when you're dead.
Yeah.
And so he leaves her with this. Do you want to continue being on this path of destruction and following Kylo, or are you willing to turn your life around and pursue something healthier?
Well, maybe even because I think this would be an even bigger idea of the redemption, where maybe this Padawan does something that they feel they can't come back from. Like they do something so horrific, in their mind, that they feel they can't come back from it.
And maybe what that thing is you gave me an idea. What if, as part of a way of trying to separate Rey from any help she has with Leia, Kylo sends the confused apprentice as a way of showing loyalty to go kill his mother. And it's actually Finn stepping in as a bodyguard to protect Leia,
Mm.
And he and Leia have that conversation with the Padawan. And the Padawan then returns to Kylo, and they have that moment of face off. Kylo, comes after the Padawan, trying to destroy him or her. At which point, Rey appears to protect the Padawan.
Yeah.
So then you have that redemptive arc. It's just done differently.
Yeah.
It's Rey doing the thing that Kenobi failed to do.
I think this has been fun. I've liked this. And then as we move forward going on, we can kind of expand on this with each movie and maybe even do other trilogies, maybe even look at the other trilogies and see like what changes we might make with the original trilogy even, or the prequel trilogy. Yeah. Maybe even write our own Star Wars story.
Got a couple actually that I've put.
I do too. I've been working on a idea for a kind of a what if. I was going to do it last year, but things happened. It was, a what if Vader had lived at the end of Empire, at the end of Jedi.
Dark Horse actually did a couple of those.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of the what ifs.
Yeah, it was the alternate version of Empire Strikes Back is the one I saw, and Luke and Leia actually succeeds in redeeming Vader, and Vader he's still wearing the suit.
Oh yeah, the suit is white with round rays. Yeah. And my idea was to have, and we actually turned this into another episode where we talked to a lawyer, which was the trial of Vader. Ooh. Where Vader lives, he turns to the dark, he still turns to the light side, but he turns himself in for trial. So it was, what would a trial? So that was my idea for this sort of, I want to do sort of an audio drama type thing with the trial of Darth Vader. But the other ones of the comics I've read, it is in the one they did for New Hope. The attack on the Death Star fails, and it doesn't manage to totally destroy the Death Star. It managed to damage it, so it's not firing at full power. But they're able to still destroy Yavin 4. But they capture Leia, and Leia is brainwashed. Is tortured and brainwashed into becoming an Imperial.
That would be...
But the final scene is really cool. It's Yoda. Luke still trains with Yoda and goes back, and you still have that confrontation. And that's where Vader finds out, like, wait a minute, I have a son? Well, what's going on here? Yeah. You lied to me? The final scene is Yoda taking over the Death Star, mind controlling Tarkin, and flying it into Coruscant, just crashing the entire Death Star onto the Imperial Palace.
That would be fun.
And then in Empire, it was Luke dies in the snow. Luke dies on Hoth, and it's Leia who takes up the mantle.
Yeah, and
goes to train with Yoda.
Yeah, there's been some cool what if stuff. And I think the DLC for the Force Awakens game, or not Force Awakens, Force Unleashed games, both games had some really interesting DLC that it was kind of like the what if you took the dark side ending for both games and how that would play.
Yeah. I did like the what if they did for the original PS2 episode 3. Mm-hmm. They had there's two endings. There's one. If you play it like regular and Vader loses against Obi-Wan, then it shows the original ending from episode 3. But then there's another alternate ending where you kill Obi-Wan, where you manage to flip behind him and stab him in the back and kill him. And then the ending is you see Anakin walking, you see the clone troopers and the Imperial shuttle landing and the Empire handing over. and handing him his lightsaber and saying, together we will rule our empire, something like that. Him taking the lightsaber and then just stabbing the Emperor and killing the Emperor and saying, "No, it's my empire." It was like,
yeah, that would definitely be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun, but we are at the hour mark, so let's call this a wrap. Garrett, why don't you tell the people out there where they can find you at?
All right. Well, you guys can find me on Instagram and Twitter at GKJ_publishing. You can also find me on YouTube. The link for that, just look for GKJ Publishing. I'm the only one with that title, that playlist, and you'll be able to find all sorts of really cool stuff, author interviews, top 10 book recommendations, creative writing tips, as well as promotion for my own books as well.
Yeah. As for us right here, if you want to get a hold of us, the best way to do that is through email. Email us at warofthestars1@gmail.com. You can also go to @warofthestars1 on Twitter. That is our Twitter handle. Or search War of the Stars on Facebook. And search for the Facebook group there. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/War of the Stars, or go to spreadshirt.com and search for War of the Stars. And you can catch our cool merch there. We are, of course, a part of the Red 5 Network. Go to red5network.com for more information. That will do it for us this week. As always, remember, this isn't just my Star Wars. This isn't just your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. Until next time, may the Force be with you.